Thank you for attending the presentation all about the SS Thistlegorm and the wreck that keeps giving. It's been a few years since I presented the work at the NAS conference. Last time was 2017 when we just finished the field work and processing. So it's a great privilege and honour to be able to share with you what we've learned since then. And a big thanks to Mark and NAS for this opportunity. I hope you enjoy it. So a little bit of an agenda for us, the introduction, a little bit about me, and a recap and refresh of where we are, or where we were in 2017. Then we'll have a look at the research that we've done and conducted since then and what we've learned, what we've found. A look forward, as best we can in these days, to the forthcoming field work. We should have been there this year, but hey, the planet had other ideas, so it's been postponed. And then finally we'll have a look at the publications that are out, including a new book which is due out this week. So a little bit about me. I'm a commercial diver. I hold HSE Scuba, also the author of the story of UB116, plus co-author of Diving the SS Thistlegorm. I do a fair amount of photogrammetry work. Clients include Historic England and National Geographic and Discovery Canada TV channels, and as a result I have a business dedicated to that, which is Deep 3D. We're also the UK reseller for UIS, which is a underwater navigation and information system that we'll have a look at a little bit later as well. I also run a partnership with a colleague of mine, which is AccuPixel Limited, that looks after police forensics and the application of photogrammetry in the preservation of evidence at vehicle collisions, so forensic investigation. That's something that has started in the last 12 months and is progressing quite nicely. And then I also run a data management consultancy called Kaizen PLM that looks after how data for large companies such as defence, infrastructure and subsea projects manage their information and how it all holds together. So it may seem quite a diverse mix, but all three actually work closely together, because at the end of the day photogrammetry generates a lot of data, so understanding the management of that kind of volume of data has proved invaluable over the years. So busy life, but quite interesting, and amongst all this I also get time to research the Thistlegorm as well. So how did it all begin? Well, back in 2017 myself and Mike Postons and John Henderson went to the Red Sea to baseline and document the remains of the SS Thistlegorm. Now, I made a personal commitment that I would go and scan all of this wreck if I was given the opportunity. But what I didn't know at the time was just how big the damn thing was. It turns out that I did it, but when I first saw the wreck on the first dive of the first day, I did start to question why I had committed to doing such a large subject. But there you go. You can, if you presented with challenges, rise to them. In this case, we delivered. So we went out and scanned the wreck, really to give us a baseline. The Thistlegorm is a cultural and financial asset for the Egyptians. It is a very popular dive site. It drives tourist business. People will make specific journeys to the Red Sea, to Egypt, and spend money to dive the wreck. So preserving it and making sure it's there for future is both of cultural and of economic interest, basically. So before we understand just how the wreck is changing through human interaction, we've gone and baselined it and created the Thistlegorm model, so we have a point of reference. We spent 6 days moored above the wreck, diving it every day, sometimes 3 times a day. It was, quite frankly, quite tiring, but it's something I'd repeat again because it was very enjoyable. After each dive, the information, the images would come back, and I would process them and start to assemble a low-res, low-quality copy, just to prove, whilst we're on site, that we had everything and all the images were aligning. And that's me at work in the saloon, trying to put the upper cargo deck together or reviewing the results. And that went on for 6 days. When we got back, I spent another 65 days then building the 3D models in their entirety, assembling them, generating the outputs like the orthophotos. That's us sailing back from the Thistlegorm towards Hurghada. It was a great team, truly international team, Egyptian and UK collaboration. It was, as I say, quite an intense week, but very, very enjoyable, very rewarding. Something I'd do again, hope to do again next year with the same team. The work that began alongside really the processing, 65 days of processing, was starting to take a look at what do we know about the Thistlegorm and what is there to be discovered. And at this time we started to talk to Alex Mustard, who has done a massive amount of work looking at the cargo. Now, Alex is a very, very accomplished underwater photographer in his own right. He's known for writing books on the subject and running training courses and workshops here in the UK and abroad. But he's probably not so well known as the fact that he has delved into the detail of what is actually in the cargo. What make and model does the ship have in its holds? And he has done what I consider to be the definitive work. And we started chatting and thinking, well, if you know what's there and we know exactly where things are, maybe we could put a dive slate together, or maybe we could do something else. And we sort of chewed a few ideas around, and in the end we settled on doing an iBook together. And the result was we published an iBook back in 2018. The iBook is no longer in publication, no longer available, unfortunately. It didn't prove to be the success we hoped for, but as we'll see, our research will become shortly available in both hardback and paperback editions of a forthcoming book. But one of the archives that we did delve into was the Tyne and Wear Museum. They hold a rich array of documentation, and they held the builder's plans for the Thistlegorm and the engine specifications. So that was one of our first port of call. Can we have a copy of the builder's plans? Yep, you can. Here you go. This starts then to tell us a lot more about the ship that we didn't know. It tells us what some of the rooms and areas are used for. It also tells us how the builders intended the ship to be used, but it doesn't necessarily record how the ship ended up being used. And there is some contradictions here, not least of which is the position of this building here, or this room here, which is the radio room, as we no longer believe the radio room was positioned after the engine room anymore, even though that area has been destroyed by the explosion. We've got good evidence to suggest the radio was actually somewhere else. But from that, Mike Postons did a fantastic 3D reconstruction. This is how we believe the ship would have looked in its heyday, just before it sunk, complete with its deck cargo of railway locomotives. And Mike used several sources for this. He not only used the builder's plans, but he also watched the film that Cousteau shot of the ship back in the 50s. And you'll notice that the bell is positioned on the forecastle deck, and that is where the video that Mike has reviewed places the bell in its contemporary position. Bell's no longer on site. Obviously it's missing, no one knows where it is, but we know it was there in 1953. So just to give you a sort of more detailed view, this is all based on either the builder's plans or the 3D model of the ship as recorded today, or it's based on the video that Cousteau shot. So it's as close as we think we can get to what the ship looked like prior to its loss. The archives themselves, the National Archives at Kew, were a very, very good source of information. This is the certificate of registration for the Thistlegorm. You can see the name of the vessel, obviously its number, its gross tonnage, all those kind of details that the shipping line would have recorded. It's also got, drawn down the side here, the signal flags, hand sketched by someone, raised on a flagpole with signal letters to tell us what they are. It's a little almost like an idle doodling by a civil servant, recording something that is recorded elsewhere in the document, but no, they decided to actually write it in flags. So it's a little personal touch. You'll also notice that there's a big red stripe through it and red annotation here, and this is the striking off in the register of the vessel, recording the fact it was sunk in October 1941. The date of this is actually December the 26th, my apologies, 26th, so Boxing Day. So somebody may well have been at work on Boxing Day in the British Registry of Shipping, striking off vessels that had sunk. Now, Thistlegorm was constructed as a merchant ship, but she was armed, and these vessels are known as DEMs, or defensively armed merchant ships. Now, a DEM, as the name suggests, isn't an offensive vehicle weapon system. It is purely defensive. That's why the guns are at the stern, so that you're intending to be sailing away from your assailant whilst firing at them. But this clearly rattled the Germans. Now, prior to the Second World War, the British government had a policy of making sure that every merchant vessel constructed leading up to the war was capable of taking armaments. Now, this required the stiffening and extra strength in the hull and in the deck, so you could mount a gun. And it's not surprising that the owners of these vessels and who were paying for their construction didn't really want to pay the extra for that. So in the end, the deal was struck that the Admiralty would pay for the additional work to give the capability of a duck gun to be mounted, and the owners wouldn't be charged for it. So ships were starting to be built before the war commenced, being capable of taking a gun, because clearly at the time everything was leading to war, so they were preparing for it. The Thistlegorm was built in 1940, and as a result was armed from day one. Now again, the Admiralty would have paid for that, but there's an interesting comment here as Germany renounces the London Submarine Convention, and clearly, as they're saying here, the British ships are not intended for hunting seals, but for offering resistance. Well, that's warfare for you. Slightly interesting diplomatic language used to announce that U-boat commanders are authorised to sink merchant vessels. From the DEMS records, we know that the Thistlegorm was armed or protected in 3 phases. These records list every British ship on the merchant register and records their capability of defence. July 1940, we know the Thistlegorm was degaussed, which is a technique to wipe the magnetic signature of a ship so it doesn't trigger a magnetic mine so easily. And then in August 1940, her first armament, the 4-inch low-angle gun, and paravanes were fitted. Now the paravanes are still on board, they're still on the deck, and they are an anti-mine warfare equipment. They would have been streamed from the ship, extending a chain out from the bow, intended to snag any mine that was in its path. The mine would then be dragged towards the paravane, where it would either be destroyed or exploded on contact. So that happened in 1940, and then the next reference we get is July 1941, when the second gun, the 12-pounder high angle gun, is fitted. So 3 waves or 3 phases of arming or protecting the ship occurred. Now, when it came to the fitting of the guns, the Admiralty, as we know, would pay for the mounting, but they wouldn't pay for any shielding or protection of the gunners. Now, we know from the Thistlegorm that the owners did indeed fund that. This is the mounting for a Lewis gun, which is a 303 machine gun used primarily for anti-aircraft defence, and it's found just on the main deck, just forward of the bridge. And there's the mounting. This end would have taken the machine gun, this end would have been fixed to the deck, and we can see there is a shield. So we now know the Thistlegorm owners were dipping into their own pocket to spend money on protecting the gunners on board. The actual location of the ship has been picked into as well, because Cousteau does say in his book, The Living Sea, that it took him a while to find it. Well, we wonder how long. This satellite view here, and this little blue dot with the arrow, indicates where the Thistlegorm lies today, and that blue dot is actually a zoomed out view of the orthophoto of the main site, and it's shown in context here in Metashape Professional, the processing software, with the shoals and the shoreline of the Gulf of Suez. This inset here shows the symbol for a wreck in the same position. And that symbol for the wreck is the SS Thistlegorm, and we know that it's within about 80 metres of her current position. So the chart from 1948 is quite accurate in recording its position of its loss in 1941. Had Cousteau sailed those waters with the Admiralty chart, which is highly likely, in the early 1950s, the position of the wreck would have been known and should have been fairly accurate and therefore reasonably easy to find. The other rich source of information was the British intelligence reports from the Gulf of Suez at the time. This here is a record of the air activity and for the month of October, and here they're recording the attack on the SS Thistlegorm and its loss, and the fact that 38 survivors were picked up and 3 hurricanes were scrambled to intercept but were unable to. The belief at the time was, and taken here from the comment, is that British intelligence believed the attack was carried out by a Focke-Wulf Condor, which is a 4-engine heavy bomber with a considerable range and high performance. They didn't believe for 1 minute that the Heinkel that we now know attacked and sank the Thistlegorm was capable of flying that far, but clearly it did, and this contemporary report for intelligence is fundamentally wrong. So much for British intelligence, not always accurate. The most poignant find, though, was the citation for Angus MacLeay's acts of bravery on the night in question. He was awarded the George Medal, and these 2 documents here record that awarding, firstly by the First Sea Lord, and secondly by the Prime Minister, both recommending to the King that Angus was worthy of this medal. And this little document here, is a poignant reminder of the events that night and what Angus did to save the life of a DEMS gunner, one of the Royal Navy ratings on board. Angus was injured in that. He had his feet were badly burnt, and we know now what he did to go and rescue someone that had made it up to deck level, but was unconscious with the ship on fire, and he managed to rescue him and get him into the second mate's boat and save his life. We also see the record here that after he brought the gunner to safety, the ship blew up. Well, we know from what's on the seabed today, there was a significant explosion destroying hold number 4 and the surrounding area. The orthophotos, one of the outputs from the 3D model, have been a particularly rich source of research. The one on the left is of the main site, and it covers 5 acres running from the anchor in the north west to the stern in the southeast. It's georeferenced and scaled, so we know this is the position, orientation, the context of the ship, and we're able to measure anything we want from it. The original orthophoto, as shown here, was processed at 10mm per pixel back in 2017. It's all the hardware would let me process, which was still quite detailed. But given that I've invested more in some hardware and the software has actually changed slightly, I can now process it at 2mm per pixel, and the resolution of that image is stunning. Very pleased with that. On the right hand side is an ortho photo of the lower cargo deck, showing the vehicles neatly stacked in rows on the hold number 2 and the objects in hold number 1 plus some more vehicles. Now this one is processed at 1mm per pixel. The orthophoto on the left derived from about 15,000 images, and the one on the right is derived from about 5,000. So we're talking quite a large amount of data to produce these, but once you have them and you're confident they're scaled and accurate, they are priceless. The anchor lying on the seabed was identified, and we now know who cast it. There are 3 anchors, 2 of which we know. This one here on the seabed, the second one in the hawser. There's an anchor as well, should be in the stern. Last week I found an anchor chain that runs off the edge of the orthophoto, and when we're back we're going to follow it to see what's on the end, because it may well have the 3rd anchor. But we do know from the casting marks on each fluke, there's a diamond and a circle, that this anchor was cast by W.L. Byers and Co. So we now know from the orthophoto who made the anchor. This room, which sits under the forecastle deck at the bow, also piqued our interest, and there was an object in here that we had a closer look at. This is a cable drum, and we're thinking, why would an electrical cable drum or drum, that kind of equipment be there? And Alex has obviously been around the wreck, photographed much of it, and he said he had a photograph of it, and here it is. This is this cable drum that we're looking down on, and we believe this now to be a degaussing cable. Now, degaussing cable, electric cable, would have been draped over the ship, and when the electric current runs through it, it starts to wipe the magnetic signature from the steelwork. So thus becomes the ship starts to become invisible to a magnetic mind. And the Thistlegorm would have needed this doing regularly as it travelled around, picking up the magnetic signature from the Earth's magnetic field. So that was one find. This here is an orthophoto of the upper cargo deck, and each one of the brown rectangles is representing where a BSA M20 motorbike is found. Now we know from Cousteau's book The Living Sea, he raised a motorbike. There is a photograph of Cousteau admiring a BSA M20 on the deck of the Calypso. I mean, obviously it'd been underwater for 10 or 12 years by the time he raised it, so what state it's in, whether it could ever be ridden again, is questionable, but there you go, he raised one. And we now know, or believe we know, that this red area here is where he raised the motorbike from. Every vehicle, and these are Morris commercial vehicles, there's 1, 2, 3 here, 4th one here, more here, have all got 5 motorbikes on the cargo bed. There is 1, 2, 3, 4 plus the 5th, and again 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th, all of them consistent, except this one. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's nothing in this spot here, this red area. And if you were going to raise a motorbike, you'd choose an easy one, and this one is on the edge of the hold of the upper deck, so that's probably the point that Cousteau helped himself to a motorbike. We can just take a look here. This is looking towards the entrance of the cargo hold, and the motorbike would have been fixed to the back of the lorry here, running across the back behind this motorbike. Now this room here sits underneath the bridge. We think it was subdivided into other rooms as well. We know there's a divider here and a divider here, but we also think there was a divider across here as well, because we have a bath and a head there in the sill. There's also the remains of a sink in here too, and this room is marked as the captain's house, leading us to think it may have been the captain's quarters, or certainly part of the captain's quarters. But this room here, this area here, caught our eye. You'll also notice that the floor of this room is covered in these rectangles. These are concrete slabs. Now, in John Keane's book, Thistlegorm, one of the survivors, the radio operator, records the wireless room being protected by these concrete slabs. So, although the builder's plans record the wireless room being aft of the funnel, we actually think it was moved, and we think it's in this room here. And there's 2 reasons. One is the contemporary account from the survivor, I think it's Ray Gibson, saying about these concrete slabs protecting the bridge area. And secondly, if you look in here, there's an object in the floor of this room here, and this is the ortho mosaic from that room, or the ortho photo. So if we just zoom in and have a look, this, we believe, is a radio tuner, or the remains of a wireless, and it's laying on the floor, and it's inside this room. So we believe this room to be the location of the wireless room, not as per the builder's plans. One of the ship's fittings that's no longer in position is the ventilator, one of the ventilators from the deck. This is now lying in the entrance to hold number 2, lower deck. It's in amongst the lorry and the cargo, but it's clearly a very distinctive shape of a ventilator that had been used to draw fresh air below decks. It's no longer in position. I suspect a lot of people swim over this every day, every week, and not even realise what it is. It's now marked, and we have a position for it. The remains of the engine room is interesting. The engine room itself is very, very badly damaged by the explosion that eventually sank the ship. But the engine is present. It's quite a substantial lump of engineering, so it's not going to move much. And we found the specification for the engine as it was built at the time for the owners. And it's quite dry, it's all scientific. It's how much pressure there is, number of furnaces. We do know there were 2 boilers, not just one. There's a main and auxiliary. But we also know that the ship, how many tons of coal the ship would consume a day, as long as, and I quote, it's of good North Country coal, 17 tons a day. The specification of the coal I find quite curious. It has to be North Country coal, cannot be Welsh coal, cannot be Scottish coal, or anybody else. Has to be North Country coal to achieve 17 tons a day. So there you go, an interesting touch. Now, one area of rich research are the locomotives. We know the Thistlegorm was carrying 2, both Stanier 8Fs, both with their water tenders and their coal tenders. The water and coal tenders have survived in situ, whereas the locomotives themselves, they were fitted alongside hold number 4, and they are liberally distributed in pieces over the seabed. There's more to learn on them as well. But for the moment, this here is a photograph from one of the coal tenders by Alex Mustard, and you can see this rod with this eye here, and then you can see this rod with an eye here in the ortho photo. And these, we've measured them, are driving rods from the locomotives, and we were curious to think, why would you remove these rods? Why would you bother? It seems strange to store the rods. Why wouldn't you just leave them on the locomotive? And the Stanier Association, who own their own Stanier and are currently restoring it and refurbishing it, have been very, very helpful. You remove driving rods when you are moving a locomotive and shunting it. If you leave the driving rods connected, you start to wear the components out. It doesn't have as much lubrication, and you're putting the steam engine components under load by working it in a reverse way. It doesn't do the life of the locomotive any good. So they take these driving rods off prior to shunting them around. So that's why they're stored in the water tenders, and they're there for everybody to see. Just swim over them. So that cleared up that little mystery. Now, another mystery that we had was this section of steelwork on the seabed. It's close to the port locomotive, so it caught my interest, and I thought, well, is it a part of the locomotive, or is it part of the engine room, or is it part of the ship structure? Not sure. Well, proving it's part of the ship structure is difficult because we don't have that level of detail. But I did send it to the Stanier Association, and they took one look at it and said, yeah, we recognise that. And they sent me back a marked up print. This is one of the engineering drawings for a Stanier 8F, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 of the driving wheels, but then this red ink highlights what we have on the seabed, and it's marked up as one of the main frames. And if we have a look in this image here, this is the section of the main frame that's lying on the seabed today, and this is the coloured in section showing exactly, an exact match. We've got the these two cutouts here for the bearing blocks. These two cutouts correspond. This drawing is also marked up with some dimensions, and the dimensions between the centres of these two cutouts is within 6mm or 1/4 of an inch of the engineering drawing. So we're quite confident that this object here on the seabed is actually part of one of the locomotives, probably the port locomotive, and as such it's nice to identify it. It's one of those things, again, I suspect a lot of people swim over it every day and not realise what it is. The locomotives as well have been given some reconstruction treatment by Mike to give us an idea about how much is missing. This section here, you can see, is what we know is on the seabed. I think this is the starboard train this time, and the light grey section is all the missing components. And as you can see, we're missing a boiler, mainframes, and crew cab. They're out there somewhere. Don't know where. Don't know where all of it is, but we know where some of it is, because Alex Mustard's been back and, following a little hand sketch, found the port boiler. Now this boiler is lying about 30-35 metres away from the port locomotive. We now know its position, and future field work will have this put back in, included in the model. Also though, note the deformation of this boiler. Some force has flattened it, and I don't believe it's water pressure. I think it's probably a result of the explosion, and probably, if we can trace it, all the other bits are out there, and they too will show similar damage. The mystery object that was sitting in the port side of the lower cargo deck at the rear has been identified. This is actually on the debris pile that is covering one of the Fordson vehicles that is stowed in that position. And when we looked at it, we thought, well, it looks like a radial engine. It's like you've got an engine cylinder here, engine cylinder here, engine cylinder here, arranged in a radial fashion. Well, the problem with that is that the finning on the cylinders isn't great enough for an engine, and there's no spark plugs and no valve gear and nothing like that, so it couldn't really be an engine. But we showed the photographs to a friend of mine who was into ship construction and build, and he took one look at it and said, looks like a refrigeration compressor. And this object at the back, we think is also the cooler tubes, the radiator bit. So how does this tie in with the ship? Well, quite nicely, because this compressor here is lying on the debris pile next to this bulkhead here, and behind that bulkhead, we now know from the builder's plans, is the cold room, the cold store. So this is part of the ship's fittings, it's not part of the cargo, and it would have been used to effectively keep the food for the journey cold. So that's tied, that's sorted that mystery out. That was good to resolve that one. Then we've got this object, or these objects. Now these are in the bow of hold number 1, lower deck. There are lots of them. They are a conundrum. They're an unusual shape. They have all the appearance of a vehicle gearbox, but there's no internals, as we can tell, and there's no input shafts or output shafts that you'd expect. And curiously, they are a cylindrical form one end and a rectangular form or square form the other. And like I say, there's lots of them. I've counted 62 at the last count, and they're buried in you can see one here, another one here. They're everywhere in this part of the hold. Very unusual. Square section one end, circular section the other. They're about 1.8 meters long as well, so they're quite substantial objects. No idea what they are. We'd like to know. If anyone has any idea, please send us a postcard. Stacked alongside them, we've got tyres as well. We've also got crates of the Enfield rifles and a cooling, an engine shroud from a Bristol blending. So there's a whole mix of equipment here, but what these are we don't know. Next mystery object's in hold number 2 again, but this time in the lower deck, but in hold number 2, and these are curious. There's 6 of these things in total, arranged in two pairs of 3. They are unusual. They are a pair of riveted construction. They have a rubber section at the top. There's a filter type thing at the top. We just don't know what they are. They appear to be in a packing crate. It's quite a substantial packing crate of some form, but what these objects were for or what their purpose was, we don't know. Again, if anyone has any idea, do please get in touch. Hold number 4 and number 5 were another area of research that the orthophoto delivered for us. You can see here on the seabed, this is alongside hold number 4, we've got one of the Stanier locomotive wheels, but we've also got here the remains of a vehicle. You can see the rear axle with the differential here, and here this end we have another axle with an engine block covered in coral. So from this and from the other remains in hold number 4, it's quite clear that that hold carried quite a lot of vehicles, now of which are distributed amongst the debris pile along the seabed. The make and model of this one, unknown. We can say with some confidence that it's not 4x4, it's 4x2, but beyond that, don't know. Hold number 5 is equally of interest. It's packed full of ammunition. You can see these crates of 4-inch shells. There's some more ammunition of different caliber here, we've yet to identify that. But there is also a lot of vehicle remains, primarily we think trailers and sort of ancillary vehicles, not main vehicles. There's also perhaps an aircraft wheel here. Now, one of the things we found is this little like cart or workshop type trolley for moving equipment around. It might be for ammunition as well, we don't know. But you can see you've got a wheel here, and the frame of where the bed would be. It does tilt because there's like a circular, or the front axle tilts because there's a circular ring here. Once we'd found this, briefed Alex Mustard where it was, and he went back and took a photograph, and this is a side view of it. Looking forward, you can see the rubber tyres. Quite a substantial construction, clearly survived long enough in the salt water, but its exact purpose remains a mystery. The ammunition in hold number 4, you can see here there's a box of shells here, there's another box here, there's another box here. There's this box here, you can see the base of the shell has been cleaned up. We don't recommend cleaning shells, please. They are alive, they can function, they're best left in peace. Particularly as they've all been subject to an explosion of some form and are likely to be unstable through that, but also through age and degradation. However, it does reveal the calibre and the date of either filling or manufacture. It's 1929, the shell is dated. We've got another shell in there dated 1941 of the same calibre, so clearly a production run and popular ammunition. One of the most poignant finds that isn't actually in the orthophoto, but I saw it when I was scanning the wreck, is pinned under the rudder and the propeller at the stern. This is the remains of a universal carrier, or a Brendan carrier. Now we know there are 3 of these in the debris pile of hold number 4, and there is every clue, all the clues here, to give us a chain of events. For this Brendan carrier to end up on the seabed underneath the wreck, had to arrive on the seabed before the wreck did, the ship did. So clearly the explosion that destroyed hold number 4 flew through this universal carrier over the stern, landed in the sea, sank, and then followed by the ship that's come down on top of it. So it's like a chain of events that we can prove the sequence of by where this object is. It's quite poignant as well. Clearly hints to the force that blew the ship apart. These things weigh several tons and it's been moved a considerable distance. So, forthcoming fieldwork. I'm not going to suggest it's actually going to happen, because we seem to live in a more random world than we did. But the plan is to go back next year, and we have going to scan up to 5 more wrecks in addition to the Thistlegorm, but also return to the Thistlegorm. There's some areas that we want to look at. We want to look at the coal store. There are some more locomotive remains that we know on the seabed, but crucially, we want to extend the seabed survey, and for that, we're intending to take sonar. And we suspect there's an awful lot of ship's cargo and potentially ship's fittings lying out on the seabed. The explosion that destroyed the Thistlegorm is intense. It was of an order of magnitude enough to tear the ship apart. So scattering of things like ships, locomotives, boilers up to 60, 70 metres from the wreck takes a considerable force. We think there's going to be a lot out there, and a lot to find and a lot to look at. There's at least one other boiler, and there are reports of another water tender or tender 60 to 80 metres off the stern. So we're going to go and look for that too. We should, in a few passes with the sonar, get more targets that we could possibly dive in a week. But that's just a nice problem to have. We can pick and choose. Now, one of the things that will make searching through this and recording this information efficient is UIS. Now, for me, UIS is a game changer for underwater navigation, recording, and particularly in my interest, photogrammetry. The kit allows you to track divers and record positions of the diver tracker unit as you go. It also allows you to track and record your position, and to see your position in real time on the tablet, and to be able to mark the location of objects. We can also take in either a sonar overlay or an orthophoto that's georeferenced, and we can navigate around an area looking at the orthophoto while swimming over the objects we see in front of us. So there is every opportunity to make the searching of the sonar data incredibly efficient, and there's no reason why we couldn't hop from target to target using the tablet for navigation and cover off a lot more than if we had to dive the targets individually or to search for them manually. So UIS, like I say, is a game changer, and having worked with it, this is why I became the dealer. It's good. So what have we published? Well, the short answer is quite a lot. You can see all of the work so far to date in 3D and 2D on my website, Deep3D. There's the address at the top here, just here, this one. All the ortho photos are published online. You can view them, including the latest one at 2mm per pixel, plus the 3D models of the main site and the and all the rooms as well, the cargo areas that you can visit. As I said, we did collaborate, all 4 of us, Alex, John, Mike and myself, and published an iBook. Now the iBook format worked really well. We could include 3D models and you could spin them around and understand them, plus we could use hundreds of images, not restricted in any way by page count or anything like that. We could just add in more images and make the book a little bit bigger, and it proved reasonably popular, but not the success we hoped for. So we withdrew it from publication in 2019. But it did pique the interest of a paper publisher, and this year we should see 2 publications appear. One is in English, and this book, Diving the Thistlegorm, is out this week in hardback, 240 pages, featuring Alex's images, the ortho photos, the screenshots, the historical records, as much as we can possibly share and we know about Thistlegorm today. And there's also, for those amongst us that can read simplified Chinese version coming out soon too. As I said, the book has got a lot of content, the images to support it, everything from the position of objects taken from the ortho photo through to detail of like the maker's nameplate on the gun, the overview of where the areas are on the ship that we're talking about, the entrances that we can use to get into it and find out where things are, and crucially the ortho photos that show you what it's like as a plan view when you're in there. So between it all, it's been a wonderful collaboration, a really enjoyable project to work on. I do hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and if you want to find out more, well, you can drop me an email at deep3d.co.uk. There's a contact page on my website, or if you wish, acquire the book and read it for yourself. Thank you very much for your time. Hope you've enjoyed it.